Hey guys, Jay here. Welcome to Models Memories Weekly, episode 206. Models Memories is a show about nothing and is filmed in front of a live studio audience. This is a show where I talk about my painting, modeling, and wargaming experiences from the week. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Jay, you put out 3 DVDs a week. Oh, could I possibly have more to say? Well, I do, and here goes. This week, I actually got some painting done, some very high quality painting, and I'm really excited for the new Emperor's Children stuff that Games Workshop is teasing us with. But first, have you ever wanted some grim battlefield basing bits but you don't know where to get them? Well, EonsOfBattle.com is here to help. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch like the Nick and J dice. These are the Nick dice, and I can't find the J dice right now, but the Nick dice, they're fine. They're blue. They're not quite as good as the J dice, but I'll occasionally roll these. And EonsOfBattle.com is the best place to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members get 1 credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain packs or any previous pack we have ever made. For the month of February, we made the Grim Battlefield basing bits, and we're making them for real, available as physically printed packs or as digital STLs. These Grim bits are the perfect thing for your dark miniatures to stand on. War-torn scenery isn't as easy to pull off as texture-based in the grass tuff, but with these bits, it's easy to give your minis the grim dark treatment. With a selection of sandbag and barbed wire barriers, ruined walls, smashed stained glass, unexploded ordnances, and more. All sized perfectly to complement any size of miniature, from giving an upgrade to your small rank and file troopers, all the way up to big chunks of debris for filling up monster and vehicle bases, you can do it with the Grim Battlefield basing bits. Games Workshop threw us a curveball this year with the Emperor's Children army. Slaanesh has languished for years and years and decades, but we're finally getting Slaaneshi Chaos Marines. And I don't know exactly what I'm gonna do. I've been thinking about what I wanna do with Chaos because I shouldn't start a Chaos army, but I kinda want to. I've been painting up a lot of Chaos Space Marines lately, and I'm getting a little bit of the Chaos itch. Back in the Dizzy, when I was in high school, starting out in Warhammer 40,000, my buddy played Chaos. Initially, he played the Tyrannid, but then the Tyrannid kind of evaporated pretty quickly, and so he switched to Chaos. And so I kind of got to experience Chaos back then in 6th and 7th edition, but they were my mortal enemy at the time, so they were gross and disgusting, but now that I'm taking another look at Chaos all these years later, Chaos is pretty darn cool. And what I should do is work on my Death Guard. I really like the Fly Host attachment, the Grotmist attachment for the Death Guard. All infantry Death Guard get Scout 5 inches and Stealth, so they're -1 to be hit, which is really good if you want to flood the board with a bunch of Plague Marines, which I kind of really do. And that stealth is also available to Terminators and Poxwalkers. Oh, there's some really fun stuff in that attachment you can do with Poxwalkers. So if you attach them to Typhus, he can resurrect Poxwalkers from the dead with his shooting weapon, which is really good. And so you get D3+1, or it might be D3+3. It's really good. And then obviously they're -1 to be hit. But if you have one of the Blight Haulers tagging along with them, you can also get -1 to be wounded. So you can be 5 feel no pain, -1 to be hit, -1 to be wounded on a bunch of zombies that come back to life. It's really awesome and kind of cheap. You can have this big Death Star unit that's not really a Death Star, it's just the death. They don't die, and so you can have them walking up the board. I'm really excited for that. I do need to work on my Death Guard. I probably should work on my Death Guard instead of starting another Chaos Space Marine army, but I do want to start a Chaos Space Marine army. And I'm torn between doing vanilla Chaos or going with the new hotness Emperor's Children. Either way, it's gonna be Slaanesh. It's gonna be Slaanesh Marines. But vanilla Chaos is really intriguing because there's so many things that you can do with it. I wanna ally in Slaaneshi Demons and maybe ally in an Imperial Knight, or I guess a Chaos Knight. And what I really want is I want to be able to ally in a squad of Khorne Berserkers and a Rhino, because Berserkers are really fun. I've played against them a ton of times. They're great in close combat. They have Surge move, and they can easily have fights first with a Champion of Chaos or the Executioner of Chaos attached to them. And that is a wickedly good little unit. And I have this idea in my head of how I would turn Khorne Berserkers into Slaaneshi Berserkers, and I think it would look really good. And so I want to be able to do that, and I definitely couldn't do that if I bring Emperor's Children. But if I bring Emperor's Children flavored vanilla Chaos, which is kind of like vanilla ice cream with pink sprinkles on it, then I could do it. But then the Emperor's Children also just look really cool. And Games Workshop keeps teasing us with some of the detachments that are coming in this new book. It's really interesting to see something brand spanking new. I have read every rule out under the sun for Warhammer 40,000 10th edition. I've read every single data sheet in the game, but now I'm getting to look at some new stuff, and it's so interesting to think about how it's gonna play in-game. The Emperor's Children Codex got a little leaky poo. We don't get to see the data sheets, but we do get to see what units are gonna be available for the Emperor's Children. And honestly, there's some interesting things missing. You don't get some of the classic Chaos vehicles, like the Predator tanks and the Demolisher cannon, which is kind of sad, but they're not the most Slaaneshi things out there, so I can kind of see why they're missing. But we got a boatload of characters: Fulgrim, Lucius, Lord Cacophoner, Sorcerer, Demon Prince of Slaanesh, Demon Prince of Slaanesh with wings, which maybe for Slaanesh you actually want to take the wings. Usually you don't want to take the wings, but I think you do want that extra movement if you're doing Emperor's Children. Then you get the Flawless Blades, which is a demon unit. You get the Chaos Spawn. Chaos Spawn might be extra good in Emperor's Children, but more on that a little bit later. Tormentors and Fractors, Chaos Terminators, Chaos Land Raider, Noise Marine, Helldrake, Mauler Fiend, Chaos Rhino, Shalaxi, which is just really fun to say, Keeper of Secrets, Demonettes, Fiends, and Seekers. Seekers, but Fiends. Fiends are really, really good. They're like the backwards leggy demon horse things. They're really, really good. And for 105 points, you get, I think, -1 to be hits, and it's -1 to whatever squad they're in close combat with. So even if you get them in close combat and you have another Slaaneshi thing in there, and your opponent's like, well, I don't care about the Fiends. I'm gonna punch like your Lucius the Eternal and his squad of Marines. They're still -1 to their hits, which is really, really good. And for 105 points, they've got 4 wounds apiece. They don't have a save, but they have a 5-up invuln. They're really, really nice little guys, and I just like big, chonky, weird horses. Looking at some of the detachments shown off, I don't see the detachments are what's kind of making me think maybe I do want to play Emperor's Children Codex instead of Vanilla Chaos. But one of the ones they showed off is the Carnival of Excess Demonic Empowerment. That is the detachment rule, but this is the detachment where you bring 50-50 just Slaaneshi Space Marines and Slaaneshi Demons. And if you're standing near the Slaaneshi Demons, you get sustained hits 1 on your weapons. That could be really, really good. What I see this as is you bring a bunch of there's only close combat Slaaneshi Demons, but then tons and tons of Noise Marines, because those Noise Marines are gonna be spitting out a ton of shots, and if all of those shots have sustained hits 1, that can explode into a lot of attacks. So that one is really, really interesting. I was a little bit nervous that this would be the only detachment that you get to bring demons in, but I don't think it is. This one specifically, in a 2,000 point game, you can bring up to 1,000 points of demons, but in a generic Chaos army, you can just bring 500 points of demons, and that's probably about as many as you would want to take in general. So I think I'm excited for this detachment, but it's not the one that's really jingling my jams. The detachment that's really flimming my flams is the Coterie of the Conceited, Pledges to the Dark Prince. This one, at the start of the battle round, very important, it's not your command phase or your turn, you get to decide, you get to make a guess of how many units of the enemy army you're gonna kill this round. And if you get it right, you get a point. And the more points you rack up, the more things your entire army gets. This is a very similar rule to the Hedonites of Slaanesh Spearhead that I've been playing a ton of. The Hedonite Spearhead, a little tricky to play with because instead of making these guesses, you just get to offer your opponent successes on their missed rolls. That's fun, and it's really, really fun to look at your opponent and be like, oh, you missed one of those saving throws. Would you like to have not missed it? And then I get to roll on my boon table, and then usually roll really, really low, and it takes me forever to actually get my army any benefits while I'm giving my opponent a better than average game. It's really annoying, but here it looks really, really interesting because the points are 1, 3, 5, 7, and you get something on each of those numbers. The first time you get reroll hit rolls of 1, the second you get reroll wound rolls of 1, and if you kill 5 enemy units, you get lethal hits and sustained hits. And then 7 you almost don't care about because by the time 7 enemy units are dead, the game is like over. But if you manage to do that, each time critical successes are scored on 5-ups. That's really, really good, but 7 enemy units is so many units. Like if you're going up against Imperial Knights, they're not gonna have 7 units. They might, like if they're playing really, really well, they're probably allying in some chaff to stand on objectives, but in general, 7 is a lot. And if you're playing not a 2,000 point game, you're never gonna get to 7 units. I think this rule is a really, really good example of not random, but still interesting rules writing. Usually when you take randomness out of the equation, it means that the game it's a really, really powerful unit that is really, really boring. Like the Sisters of Battle have access to miracle dice. They did get a massive nerf because they're ridiculously good, but miracle dice, you could just roll and have like a pool of dice that you could swap in as a roll, which basically meant you had automatic successes. And that's really, really annoying when I'm trying to kill something, and then it's like, you can't possibly kill this because I automatically make a couple of my saving rolls. Or I'm gonna shoot you, but I've already destroyed you because I automatically have successes. It just stops the game from happening and forces something to happen, which is really, really frustrating. But here, it's just a guessing game. And it's a guess that I can probably make. And so it just becomes like, but my opponent still has the opportunity. It's like, oh, you think you're gonna kill 2 units this game, or this turn? You're not killing 2 units this turn. I'm gonna move heaven and earth and make sure it doesn't happen. It's some really, really fun back and forth. And the stratagems are really, really intriguing. The first enhancement they showed off is Pledge of Eternal Servitude. This is a resurrect stratagem. Resurrect stratagems are ridiculously powerful. This one is a little tricky because you have to make a leadership check, so you could spend the command point and still fail it pretty easily. You have like a little bit worse or a little bit better than 50-50 to get your guy back on half wounds, but it's still really, really powerful. And you're probably gonna wanna bring a lot of characters because you're Emperor's Children and you don't have that many units, and so you want those units to all have characters. But the second one, Embrace the Pain. This one is like the playstyle of the army. This one is during the fight phase. At the start of the fight phase, if you've got like 2 units in combat with one of your opponent's units, you can force them to choose which one that their punches go into. This is incredible and desperately needed for a close combat focused army, because close combat is tricky to pull off at the best of times. And then if you're going into another close combat army, like if you're going against World Eaters or Blood Angels, things can go downhill really, really fast if your opponent has something like Fights First or a Surge move. That can ruin the game for you. But all of a sudden, if your opponent's like, oh, I've got my 8-bound with an attached sorcerer and I got Fights First and I am just going to demolish you. You have no ability to fight me. All of a sudden it's like, yeah, you can fight, but all of your big, beautiful strength 12 attacks, they have to go into the Demonettes. They can't go into Lucius the Eternal and his awesome squad of sword guys. Ah, that is such a wonderful ability. I would pop that every single turn. It changes up your playstyle because you have to make sure that there's a little nothing unit that is also in combat with everything in your opponent's army. But that's also really, really useful because you can use that as a move blocker to try to make sure that your big beatstick melee units don't get tangled up. Like that's just such a fun rule. And your opponent still gets to do stuff. They get to punch something. They just don't get to punch what they want to punch. Ah, I love that rule so much. And so I don't know if I'm willing to give that up and play Vanilla Chaos, because there's a bunch of stuff that I want to do with Vanilla Chaos. I mean, if I had the models, I could just switch up detachments every now and again. In fact, I definitely would, because I can't stay committed to anything. I jump around from detachment to detachment and to army so often, but that rule, Embrace the Pain, it looks like it's so much fun. But speaking of so much fun, I had so much fun doing a little bit of painting this week. I was working on my Infinity, and I now have a proper little Infinity army. I got 3 miniatures painted, all for the Pan-Oceania, which is the human sphere faction in Infinity. They're not the baseline humans, because there's a lot of different human factions in Infinity, but these guys are kind of the Ultramarines of Infinity. And I wasn't super into them, but I ended up with some of these minis because they come with a lot of the starter sets, because I'm interested in JSA, the Japanese Successionist Army. But the Japanese Successionist Army takes me kind of a long time to paint. And while I was buying those units, I ended up with these guys. Turns out these guys paint up really, really nice and really, really quickly. I think each of these paint jobs took me a little bit over 2 hours, and I really, really like how they turned out. I had painted this Scarecrow previously, and then this week I painted up 2 Fusiliers and the ORC Trooper, which is a heavy infantry, and I've kind of fallen in love with the heavy infantry, and so when I'm building a Pano army, I think I'm gonna go hard into the heavy infantry, but these guys, they paint up really, really nice. I've been practicing with using color instead of value to push the highlights. These guys are pretty darn saturated with bright colors, but because they transition from a blue to a green and then to like a specular white highlight, I feel like there's a lot more visually interesting stuff going on in this armor than if I just focused on hue. And I really, really like how these miniatures turned out. I actually really want to get some more, but list building in Infinity, it's not tricky, but it's tricky if you don't know anything. And I'm a little lacking on knowledge, but I figured it out. So in Infinity, there's factions like the Pan-Oceania, but then within those factions, there are sectorials. The sectorials are a little bit like your detachments, but you actually have things that you can and can't take based on your sectorial, and your sectorial gives you benefits based on those units that you can take. And so the sectorial that I am interested in for Pano is the Kestrel Colonial Force. This is a detachment that is based around the big beefy guys, but not the biggest beefiest guys. Those are the tags. And I do kind of want the tags, but I'm a little bit more interested in just flooding the board with these heavy, heavy infantry. The easiest way to figure out these sectorials in Infinity is the app is free, and so you can use the app to list build, and then you can list build based on your sectorial, and so that'll give you the names of all of the different units you can take in that specific sectorial. And so you can kind of look up the name versus the unit. And there is Warsenal.com, which sells a lot of Infinity stuff, and they actually let you search by sectorial keyword. And that is also really, really handy for quickly seeing what models you're really, really interested in. And then based on like, okay, well, I know I need to have that, that, and that. And so then you look for that, that, and that in the sectorials to see which sectorial that you want to run in Infinity so that you can have all of the really juicy miniatures that you're really interested in. I actually got the chance this week to play Infinity for the first time. I used the Essentials pack, which is where I got these Pano guys, which also comes with some JSA guys. And Infinity is a really, really interesting game. It's based on a D20 system where you want to get, you have a value that you want on the D20 and you have to get as close to, but not over it. And so when you shoot, there's things like cover and range that can modify what number you want. So I think my Fusiliers, they want to hit 11, but they get a +3 if they're close range shooting. But then they have the -3 if they're shooting at something that's in cover. So it can be like you're shooting, you want an 11 +3, but then -3, so you're back at 11. And so I have to roll a number of D20 equal to the gun that they're using. And I'm really, really hoping to get as close to, but not going over, because my opponent can sometimes turn off my shots, because if they're shooting back at me, then they're rolling a D20 with a certain value they're trying to hit. And if they're aiming for a 10 and they get a 9, all of my successes have to be between 9 and 11. And that can be really, really tricky. But luckily Sean was rolling really bad for his shot, so he would get like a 3. So that gives me a lot of range for my shots in between 3 and the 11 that I need. But it is a little bit of a nail biter because it's just the one roll. And then you don't want to, when you see those high numbers, you get kind of sad because you know that they've missed. I rolled a nat 20 for like my first roll ever in Infinity, and I'm like, yes, that must mean I win. You don't win. You don't win on a nat 20 at least for a shooting attack. I think the Essentials pack for Infinity is really, really good. It comes with the board and the terrain and really, really surprisingly nice dice. You get 3 for the Pano and 3 for the JSA, and they're color coded with the symbol on either the 1 or the 20, but they're really good looking dice. I buy a lot of starter sets for games, and they always come with like that little Ziploc baggie of slightly dusty cream colored D6s, but the Infinity dice are really, really nice. Obviously that set gave me the Pano, but it also gave me some more models for my JSA army, and the pre-orders for Infinity for March are looking really, really spicy. There is the Kestrel expansion pack Gamma Kestrel. It comes with some heavy infantry guys, which are gonna go really nicely with my Pano army. And for the JSA, there is the Shinin Butai expansion pack Gamma. That one, it comes with some ridiculously cool samurai-inspired miniatures, but I'm actually not gonna get that one because for the JSA, I am interested in the Oban. In Collecting Infinity, there's a bunch of units that I'm really excited to paint and to play with, but I want to do a little smattering of all of the different factions, but I want to make sure that each faction plays really, really differently so that I have a nice smorgasbord of units to play Infinity with. And so for my Pano, I'm gonna go heavy infantry, but for the JSA, the Japanese Successionist Army, I think I wanna go hard into tags and remotes, the little buggy robots and the big giant mech suits. And Shinin Butai is kind of a little bit more heavy infantry close combat, and so I wanna do Oban, because that is the detachment that's gonna let me bring my Karakuri Special Projects robots and some of the really, really big tags. And so I'm gonna start out with some Pano because I'm gonna actually get them done in a reasonable amount of time. But then very quickly after that, I think for my JSA, I'm gonna go with some really, really big units. While I was painting these guys up on the ORC Trooper, I did a phenomenal job highlighting his tushy up to perfection, but then he's got two little RGB LEDs on his butt cheeks. And I feel like the object source lighting on the light kind of takes away from the perfect glazing that I did on his butt, and I'm a little bit disappointed by that. But another thing I completely forgot until I was completely done with these models is on my original Scarecrow, I actually flipped this guy upside down after I finished painting him and airbrushed a little bit of magenta to have bounce light reflecting off of the purple ground. And it definitely adds something, and I just forgot to do it on these new guys. It would definitely be tricky to do it now, especially since I've super glued on these grass tufts, so I would have to like rip them off, do the spray, and then put new tufts on. But I'm not sure if I want to. I think that purple does add a little something, but there's also something to just their blue legs perfectly silhouetted against the purple ground. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think? Should I go back and add a little bit of that magenta glow, or does it look really, really good that it's so easy to see where the base ends and where their feet begin? I can't decide which one I like more. Infinity kind of has like a cyberpunk anime aesthetic, and so I do feel like it works to be a little bit sillier, and I think it makes the silhouette of the model a little bit more readable to not have that reflection. But I don't know, I do kind of like how it looks on the Scarecrow, so I can't quite decide. Now that I have a slightly playable force for the Pan Oceania, I do want to add a couple more Fusiliers just so that the games are a little bit more interesting, but I am ready to go for my JSA expansion, and I have a bunch of Moonstone to paint, and I have a bunch of 40k armies to paint, and I might be starting a new Chaos Space Marine army, and I have Kroot that I should be working on as well, and I have a Dark Eldar army that I need to finish like in the next couple of weeks, because Scott, the Miniature Maniac, is going to be showing up with his Dark Eldar army at Adepticon. And I gotta make sure that I have, maybe not double what he has, but I wanna make a really good showing of it. So I have a lot to paint. Thanks for watching.